Support comes from UT's Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, featuring miles of trails and nearly 900 native plant species. More about the official Botanic Garden of Texas at wildflower.org.
Hi there, welcome to Backyard Basics. I'm William Glenn with Barton Springs Nursery, and we're going to learn about planting roses. We're going to deal today with this beautiful little sweet Julia Child rose, and we've chosen it specifically because it's a small rose. There are roses of every shape, size, form, and color out there. Fragrance too. Before you start planting a rose, it's a really good idea to learn about the rose because you want to make sure you choose the right one for the right place. Now, some of the things that you want to look out for, most importantly, is that you want to find a really sunny spot. As you can tell, we're in a spot here that's awash with sun, and roses really won't tolerate any fewer than, I would say, 6 hours of sun. It's a good idea if you can give them even a little bit more than that. 8 hours is usually the targeted amount of sun that you want to get a rose to make sure that it's in its optimal form and it's blooming well. Another element that we want to consider is improving the soil. It's really rare that the native soil is going to be in a state that's going to be great for roses. So what we do is advise that you always make sure that the soil gains some fertility with the application of compost and porosity with the application of something like expanded shale, lava rock, or maybe decomposed granite. I prefer expanded shale because I feel like it gives a nice loft to the soil, makes it really porous and accepts water readily, and also hangs on to water a little bit longer. So whether you have a sandy soil and you want to enhance the water holding capacity, or you have a clay soil and you want to enhance the air and the porosity in the soil, we're going to go ahead and get going on this rose. What you'll notice is that we have dug a hole, and they'll tell you a lot of times, you'll hear the adage, dig an ugly hole. So you want to dig an ugly hole that has plenty of cavities, crevices, fissures, places for the roots to effectively escape the hole that you've dug so that they're not bound and get the tendency to get girdled in there. Alternatively, what my preference is, when I'm building a bed, is I will actually use something called a broad fork, a garden fork, or you can even use a shovel. But basically the idea is to amend the adjacency, right? The area that surrounds the hole, so that you're not only improving the hole itself where the rose is going to live, but encouraging it to migrate outwards and for those roots to also find some comfort and nutrient and water on the outside of that hole. Short term, you're going to get it established quicker, and long term, you're going to give it a more optimal environment in which to thrive. We'll go ahead and get started with this, and we'll go over some tips that I use and have used over the years. So you'll notice when I dumped this out of the pot that it doesn't have a real heavy rooting sort of net that has been created around the outside from being in the pot for a long time. This one is relatively fresh, and so I don't usually try to mess with the roots too much. I want to be gentle with this root ball and maybe coax those roots out a little bit to make sure that they're pointing outward. If it were a more heavy sort of rooting situation where I'm just seeing a white web of all kinds of roots, I might massage it a little bit more vigorously and try my best to get those roots separated so that they are encouraged to move outwards. But in this case, I'll probably just do a little bit of light sort of massage, make sure that these roots are ready to penetrate the side walls of that hole that we just dug and get into that improved soil. So what I'm doing here is placing it and watching to make sure that I'm not going too deep. You'll see that a lot of rose growers, especially up north, will advise that you bury what's called the bud union. That's where a stalk and a scion are grafted together. And up north, it's a little bit more important because they get a lot colder temperatures. They get winds that can damage the scion, the upper part of your rose, the rose that you want. Here in the Sun Belt, though, in the southern part of the United States where we are, I don't advise doing. I like to keep this bud union above ground, whether it's grown on its own roots or it's grafted. When it's own roots, it's a little easier to see, but basically the easiest way to remember this is just try to keep the soil level with what you got from the nursery. The soil that I've excavated from the hole is partially native soil. It's partially acidified cotton burr compost, which I really like because it has low levels of nutrient. But it also has a little bit of sulfur in there to help buffer the pH. We have really alkaline soils. When you add that acid in there, you get a little bit more iron availability, get a little bit more of phosphorus availability, and you get some life in there. So you'll see that I'm going to just start backfilling this hole little by little, and as I go, I am going to water little by little to help the air pockets in there settle. What I've got here is just water with a little bit of a root stimulant, an organic one, that is a fulvic acid and a humic acid complex. And this will help sort of get the roots off to a good start. We don't necessarily fertilize when we're opening up the soil for the first time and planting something. I like to use these stimulants, these natural things, molasses, fulvic acid, humic acid, seaweed, things that are stimulants and that will get the soil life up and running, but not necessarily push growth of the plant. You add nitrogen, especially if it's going to get cold soon, you can actually get into a situation where you have tender growth that's affected. I usually try to remind people that you don't really want to shove this down. You don't want to step on that soil and really mash it in there. You want to retain whatever porosity you can. So we're careful not to walk on these gardens. We're careful to make sure that we keep the airspace as open as we can and let the water do the firming for us. So again, just little by little here, applying that backfill and some of that nutrient complex root stimulator that I described. So we're almost there. Using a lot of this soil that has got the compost and expanded shale in it. And now we're getting just about to ground level. You can see that the top of that root ball is now pretty much even with the soil that surrounds it. I'll do one final watering, kind of get it firmed up one more time, see if any sort of openings happen with the water. Maybe something sort of collapses in there, and then we just refill that. Looks pretty good. I always advise too a healthy layer of mulch, but like with most woody species, you want to be careful that you're not putting the mulch right up against the plant. That can sort of encourage some rotting organisms, and you don't want that. You do want a layer of mulch that's going to mitigate some of the temperature fluctuations that could happen in the soil, especially in the summer and in the cold. You want to sort of retain a good level soil temperature, and it'll also suppress weeds. And long term, it's going to break down just like any other organic material and provide low levels of nutrients as well. A couple other things to mention is that before we do any of the planting, we try to keep this area nice, uniform moisture. We probably give it a good soak in the wintertime at least, about once a week. And the idea is we don't want to let the soil sort of firm up, go hydrophobic, and make these channels in there where moisture is difficult for certain plant roots to get to. As we move into the growing season in spring, we'll probably up that. We always watch the leaves of the plants to make sure that if they start to droop a little bit, that's a good indication that it's time to water. But as a general rule, probably here on a little bit of a slope in a sunny spot, we're gonna give this a good soak in spring, probably twice a week. And in summer, we might jump that up to every other day. We'll just watch it. And over time, it should become less and less reliant on us for water. But I think as a good rule of thumb, that's a good place to start, and we want to just observe. Some roses are more prone to fungus and things like that. Aphids can become a problem, sometimes thrips. So you want to monitor them, especially when they're getting up and running. You want to make sure that if there is something, little spots or something like that, that you're dealing with it quickly. And if you do get a little bit of a fungal outbreak, there are great organic sprays to help take care of that. If you do want to remove leaves, no big deal, they like it. You can remove leaves at any time and just go ahead and throw those away. Should I prune my roses when I plant? Well, you can, and there's a lot of specificity when you ask a rosarian, how do I prune my roses? There's going to be outward facing eyes, there's going to be opening up the middle, all those things you can do. I tend to be pretty hands off. I like to let a rose sort of take its form. Occasionally I'll do selective pruning if I see stems moving inward, or if I see a problem, something dead wood or something that I just don't like the way it looks. But generally speaking, shears are about all I use. I'll just go in there and be pretty merciless, just whack, whack, whack. And they seem to recover quite well, as long as it's a rose that's well adapted for our area and happy where it is. What about transplanting roses? Roses usually transplant pretty well. If you do it in the cool season, if you do it in fall, or maybe on a mild day in winter, that's usually a successful operation. What I like to do is make sure that the soil is moist about 24 hours before I do the actual transplant. And then I'll get a sharpshooter and try my best to kind of angle it in such a way where I'm going to get as much of that root ball as I possibly can. I've actually moved a Belinda's Dream with a pickaxe one time, and it looked like it was removed by a caffeinated beaver. It was a total mess, and we ripped it out because we didn't really have a choice. We had to move quickly. And that thing is one of the most pretty roses that I've got on the property now. So it's just a testament to their resilience and their vigor. But if you want to do it properly, a good soak the day before is a great idea. Maybe putting a couple of slices in with the sharpshooter a day before as well, so that the plant is sort of aware that this is going to happen. And then also having the new hole, the place to which it'll be moving, ready to go. For Backyard Basics, I'm William Glenn with Barton Springs Nursery. We'll see you next time.